Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Mackay, and I'm the president of the New York Central System Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you to our first virtual modeling mini convention. We've had several conventions prior in person, but due to the health problems currently going on, obviously that's not able to happen. So we've worked to put this together for you in lieu of those, and I hope you enjoy it very much. There'll be 4 presenters this afternoon. Each will be about 45 minutes long, followed by a short question and answer period, depending on how many questions we get. Please post your questions on the chat column in YouTube. They will be transferred to the presenter at the end, who will try to address them for you. At the end of the question and answer session, there'll be a 10-minute intermission, and then we'll proceed into the next presentation. So without further ado, Alex Schneider has a presentation on Pullman compartment cars assigned to the New York Central. Let's sit back and enjoy.
Good afternoon. This is Alex Schneider. I'm presenting on the Pullman cars assigned to the New York Central Railroad. So let me see if I can get this thing beginning. Okay, this talk covers 4 Pullman plans that were introduced between 1910 and 1914, which were either built for the New York Central assignment, or they were so assigned before U.S. entry into World War I in 1917. And in all cases, they had no sections, all revenue space with either compartments or a compartment and drawing room mix. After accidents in the Park Avenue Tunnel, in which this talk covers 4 Pullman plans, New York City mandated use of steel cars in tunnels within the city. Steam locomotives were banned at the same time. The mandate took effect about 1912, initially applying to New York Central and New Haven operations into Grand Central, and to Pennsylvania and Long Island Railroad when Penn Station opened. Pullman built its first steel sleeping car in 1907 and refined the design about 1910. And within 3 years of that date, Pullman had completed over 1,100 steel sleeping cars and nearly 200 steel parlor cars, most of which were assigned to the New York Central, the Pennsylvania, and the New Haven, because their trains carried all Pullman service that ran into New York City. Early Pullman car plans offering compartments included the following. Plan 2505, consisting of 10 compartments. Plan 2522, 7 compartments and 2 drawing rooms. Plan 2540, 8 compartments and an observation lounge. And Plan 2413, 6 compartments and an observation lounge. Most of these plans were built for other roads as well as for New York Central. And the arrangement of accommodations in each of these cars was little changed from the last decade or so of wooden car designs. For instance, the configuration of Plan 2522 had been used earlier on wood cars of Plan 1845 built for the Santa Fe and Rock Island. Until new Pullman motors began to arrive in 1923 to 25, these cars were the best New York Central had to offer on its top trains. The 20th Century Limited, the Southwestern Limited, the Lakeshore Limited, and the Wolverine. So here's the first one. Rondax is an example of a 10-compartment car, one of the earliest all-steel sleeping cars. On the specification scheme, it's known as Phase 1. And the frosted Gothic windows here at the top of the window areas for each section and the oval-topped washroom windows are notable features distinguishing a Plan 1 or Phase 1 car. Here's another example, Highland Falls, built in 1914, specifically for New York Central service. Now, In 1926, the Catholic Church held a Eucharistic Congress in Chicago, and the New York Central operated a special Cardinals train to the event for the prelates coming from overseas, and it was run as a section of the 20th Century Limited. Sunderland was among the cars chosen for this, which were temporarily painted red and renamed for the occasion. Notice that an extended letterboard has covered over the Gothic windows such cars featured when they were originally built. The initial service of the cars was on the 20th Century Limited, but they continued in other trains for a number of years up till about 1930 on the New York Central, at which time they ceased to be regularly assigned in that service. Apparently, the plan wasn't all that successful because it wasn't repeated after the 1914 period. But in 1925, 3 of the cars were rebuilt with a lounge and reassigned to Washington to Montreal service. And they received air conditioning. In addition, Ridgeville was used in the Rexall chartered train in 1936. The fact that only 5 of the cars of this plan received air conditioning suggested that they weren't particularly highly regarded. So Ridgeville and Sunderland, which were 2 air-conditioned cars that weren't reconfigured, were sold to Royal American Shows in 1958. And probably the car in the foreground is one of them. The second plan, 2522, 7 compartments and 2 drawing rooms, of which Cochiti is an example. It was built in 1911 for general service, and the photo was taken at the Pullman Works in Chicago. While it's not easily seen in a distant photo like this, such early cars had vertical steel siding in strips or sheets that appeared similar to wood siding. Apparently, some early passengers feared that a steel car would be more dangerous if the car was struck by lightning. Now, I'm going to discuss this plan in 2 phases: the early cars built before U.S. entry into World War I, and I'm also going to discuss as a separate group a lot built in 1923, which incorporated a number of design changes. But here's an early one. Like many early Pullman exterior photos, the print was made from a glass plate negative to which a paper mask was glued for printing. The mask was created by printing the negative and then cutting out the image of the car to be produced. Here's another example taken from some classic trains, because access to the Smithsonian Library to get direct prints is currently interrupted by the pandemic. I'm surprised a little at Dubin's comment about striping, because by the time this car was built, striping had pretty generally fallen out of favor. Here's an example very late in the life of these cars. Canadian National purchased a number of cars Pullman considered obsolete in the first years of World War II, and they converted them to coaches for military traffic. Note again the wider steel letterboard plated over the Gothic windows. Here's another example. This is a car that didn't get sold, and it had received new sheathing in 1927 and was equipped with air conditioning in 1937. Notice that the lettering font has been modernized from what appeared in earlier photographs, but the sides remain in Pullman green with golden letters. This car was retired and sold for scrap in 1964. By the time photo was taken in 1962, it was one of 3 of this plan remaining in service. This car had a modification history almost identical to Gallup, but it is shown before the lettering was modified. Now, if we assume that this date here was a home show running from Saturday to Sunday, this photo was probably taken in early 1952. Here's an example of the floor plan obtained from the Newberry Library collection. Note that all of the rooms in the car, except for compartment E, which I'm showing with my mouse here, had a connecting door to the adjacent room. This permitted sale of 2 adjacent rooms as a suite for larger parties. Other Plan 2522 subplans had different connecting door arrangements. The 2522E subplan was applied to a group of 7 cars that were upgraded from original 2522. Among the upgrades were air conditioning and brake system updates. These cars had a very long history of assignment to the New York Central, beginning about 1914 on the Lakeshore Limited, period on the 20th Century Limited, very long period on the Montreal and international trains, period on the Wolverine, the trains to Toronto, and so forth. And the last documented instances are on the New York to Toronto trains, where they were seen on a number of occasions in consist lists that can be obtained on the Canada Southern website. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, the NYC would have needed 4 cars, assuming 1 in each of the consists, and 4 cars of 2522E and 2 2522As that weren't so extensively modified were assigned during this period. It should be noted that Canada charged customs duty on a car if it remained in the country for more than 24 hours. So it was common for a car to arrive in Toronto in the morning on train 71 and depart later in the day on train 72, and these consist lists reflect that. Beginning in mid-December of 1940, 2 of the cars shown, Trianta and Waycross, were in seasonal service on the Atlantic coastline. The second subgroup of these cars, 2522C, were built in 1923. And as you can see from this drawing, the design had changed quite a bit. 3 of the cars in this lot were assigned initially to New York Central and Big 4. And I sort of suspect they would have run either from New York to Cincinnati or New York to St. Louis, but I don't have any documentation on that subject. 2 cars received ICE air conditioning for seasonal service to Florida on the Atlantic coastline, but they only ran 1 season. And they were replaced the next season with older cars which had Pullman mechanical air conditioning. Probably there were problems with layovers in Florida where the cars got pretty hot. I'd have to take issue with what's shown in this comments here, because although 7 cars were sold to the Pullman by the Pullman company, they weren't leased back. They went to various railroads and were used for other purposes. Here's an as-built example, President Roosevelt, which is one of the cars initially on service on the New York Central. By the time these cars were built, Pullman design provided only single windows along the aisle as opposed to pairs of windows. And note also the top equalizer type 242 trucks that were in vogue for about a 3-year period of Pullman construction in the early 1920s. As a detailed presentation, the masking technique for printing exterior photos had also been discontinued. Here's a later example of such a car, President Harrison, which was initially on the New York Central, but probably was in use elsewhere by the time ICE air conditioning was applied. And although this car was re-equipped with drop equalizer trucks when air conditioned, by this point it has the top equalizer trucks restored. In the post-war period, it was the only car of this subplan having air conditioning, which would have been deemed essential for regular assignments. The third plan 2540 was 8 compartments and an observation lounge. And it's probably the best known car for a couple of reasons we'll get into later. 9 cars were built to this plan in 1911, and construction began in 1917 on 5 similar cars in Plan 2540A. But due to U.S. entry into World War I, they were finished as 16-section cars instead, probably for military traffic. Designated as Plan 2412X, they were slightly longer than other 16-section cars. Here's an early instance of such a car in service, a 20th Century Limited accident that occurred near Hyde Park, New York. And this information is taken from the Interstate Commerce Commission report. And the notable portion is here, that the train consisted of the engine, a buffet car, 4 sleeping cars, 1 dining car, and 1 observation car, all of steel construction. And Watertown is obviously the observation car, which is lying on its side in shallow water. Plan 2505 car, Bay Pond, is also in the consist. And if the consist is listed in sequence, it's probably the second car in the group ahead of Watertown, the diner with the truss rod construction being between them. The accident wasn't terribly severe, and Watertown was repaired and returned to service. Here's another instance of accident. I think the thing to take away about the car is the fact this one had not been resheathed at the time of the accident. The Gothic windows are still seen in place. This was an accident at Forsyth, New York. On the night of the accident, there were 3 sections of the westbound 20th Century Limited, which were being operated as the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th sections of train number 5. And this was a device the New York Central used when running multiple sections of the 20th Century Limited to allow all but the last section to run ahead of the posted schedule. And this helped to enhance the chance of making on-time arrival for most, if not all, of the passengers. Again, the consist is listed. 2 things notable: 1, the observation car of Plan 2540, and another, the fact that there was no diner in the consist. The practice on the 20th Century Limited at that time was to switch the diner out westbound at Syracuse, New York, and then to pick one up at either Cleveland or Toledo in Ohio. And the process was reversed in the opposite direction. So coming back to the accident, the first section hit an automobile and stopped. The second section stopped for the flagman, picked it up, and proceeded up to the point of the accident. The third section apparently was riding the yellow, and it didn't stop, and telescoped the observation car of the second section, Farnham, which was so badly damaged that it had to be scrapped. 5 of the 9 cars were remodeled and assigned different plan numbers in the early 1920s. All 8 of the surviving cars were rebuilt to Plan 2540 with an enclosed vestibule, replacing the open platform in 1937. At this time, a stepped pediment style rear end was applied, at least at the vestibule end, or the newly enclosed vestibule end, and the cars received air conditioning. This is car Geneva. The car behind it in the photo is an interesting little sidelight mystery. I can't think of a railroad name that includes the characters R-A-T. And the possibilities are further limited by the car name, which presumably ended in either House or Syracuse. So suggestions are welcome. Here's a view of the interior of the car after the rebuilding. Note that at this point, the rear door of the lounge is centered, whereas in the original car, it had been offset to the left side of the car as originally built. And this change was apparently made in the 1937 rebuilding. Regular assignments after this were seasonal Florida trains on the Atlantic Coast Line and Seaboard Airline railroads. Here's a view of Plan 2540E, Westboro, after assignment. Note that there are now 3 wide windows in the lounge area and 1 less pair of compartment windows, because the 2 rear compartments had been replaced by a buffet in this area and the expanded lounge area. 4 cars were modified in this way and assigned to the Seaboard Airline. Here's another view of the Seaboard cars in the 2-tone paint scheme that was used for the Orange Blossom Special about 1948. It bears considerable similarities to New York Central's favorite scheme, but the lettering font is different. Here's an example of the floor plans that are available on the Newberry Library site. And note the arrow here. It's possible to click it to get a full screen image and study the details of the plans. After Pullman service ended with these cars, Waldemere was sold to the Boston, Maine. They used it for a time as a baggage car and then degraded it down to work service. And John Horvath provided this photograph for my presentation. The 4 remaining cars were rebuilt to Plan 2540F for Atlantic Coast Line service. A buffet replaced compartment H, but there was no change to the window configuration, and it doesn't appear that Pullman took any photos after this remodeling was done, probably because there was little or no change in exterior appearance. Here's a comparison I put together trying to track how these cars reallocated the space from the back wall of compartment F to the vestibule. One of the cars, Kano, was removed from regular Pullman assignment in 1941 for use as part of the presidential train for travel during wartime. And in 1943, a secretary's room was carved out of the lounge area. It was designated as plans 2540G and 2540H during this period. In the presidential trains, its normal position was immediately ahead of Ferdinand Magellan, which was the armored presidential car. Kano was returned to Plan 2540F with pre-war configuration and to normal service in 1946. Kano was readily at hand when FDR died in Warm Springs, Georgia in April 1945, and its wide lounge windows allowed his casket to be displayed to the thousands of mourners who lined the tracks. The funeral train moved to Washington, where he lay in state in the Capitol, and then to the Roosevelt home at Hyde Park, where he was interred. Here's a photo of the funeral train passing probably through South Carolina, based on the state flag, and Clemson or Greenville were visited on this. Here's a photo of the military honor guard surrounding his casket in the car. Here's a view as the funeral train was backing into Washington Union Station. Notice that the lounge window had been opened to facilitate removal of the casket. And here it's being loaded onto the horse-drawn hearse. The last plan we're going to touch on is 2413, 6 compartments and an observation lounge. Although 23 cars of this plan were built in 1910, only 4 had New York Central service on the Wolverine/Detroiter. This would have run from about 1911 to 1915. Brookview, Chaumont, Nahasi, and Neodak. They apparently were not assigned to New York Central after World War I. The remaining cars were rebuilt for Pennsylvania. And as they were retired relatively early, the Newberry Library doesn't have a floor plan. If one could be found, it'd be interesting to compare the amenities with the New York Central's observation car, Plan 2540. Here's a view of the accommodations that were in use in these cars and a taste of the decor that was used. Pullman cars of the period offered 4 types of accommodations: parlor seats on daytime runs, sections consisting of 2 facing seats on one side of the car, which converted into an upper and lower berth at night, and with curtains providing privacy. Compartments, an upgraded accommodation primarily offered on major markets for all Pullman trains, where the seating and sleeping accommodations of a section were enclosed in a room extending most of the width of the car, except for an aisle. And a private sink and toilet were enclosed within this compartment adjacent to the door. At the top of the pecking order, drawing room moved the toilet and sink to a separate annex with an additional window, which was usually frosted for privacy. And the door from the room to the aisle was opposite the annex. There was a sofa running longitudinally, which converted to a third bed. A window above the sofa allowed passengers to view out the opposite side of the car through the aisle if desired. Here's another view showing the window to the aisle with the curtain closed, showing the communicating door to the next accommodation in a corner of the section seat. Generally, the same upholstery was used in all rooms of a car in a particular lot, but varied quite a bit from one lot to another based on the tastes of the railroad to which a group of them were planned to be assigned. This photo also shows a drawing room, but of 1916 vintage. And as you can see, Pullman's interior decor evolved over the years, tending to follow current fashion trends, both in the design for new cars and in refurbishing of those they already had, just like an upscale hotel that has to upgrade to keep up with the market. During the Depression, Pullman installed air conditioning on most of the cars having regular assignments. And while they were in the shops for this purpose, they were also refurbished and repainted. And wood grain interiors, like the one shown here, were painted over, generally with beige or tan. Here's a view of a compartment. Pullman Company photographers seemingly took photographs of the drawing rooms and of the sleeping parlor of sections more frequently than they did of the compartments, even in cars that had all 3. These are among the few exceptions I've been able to find, and they show a later car than the ones immediately under discussion, but give a taste for the type of decor after air conditioning was installed in 1934. Note the open wash bowl, the fold-out toilet, and mirror. I'm going to touch a little bit on the brakes of these cars. 4 different systems were applied in the car under discussion. And in chronological order, they're the PM simplest system, consisting of 1 valve, 1 reservoir, and 1 cylinder. The LN scheme upgraded this, providing separate service and emergency reservoirs and a more complex valve that allowed for faster braking in emergency situations. The PC brake system, with separate service and emergency cylinders, both of which operated on both trucks, was another attempt to provide faster braking on fast trains. And oddly enough, in most cases, for the PC system, the cylinders were of different sizes. Pullman kept experimenting. In 1916, came up with the UC scheme, which was standard for heavyweight Pullmans built after 1917. The PM, LN, and UC systems were built in both one-cylinder and two-cylinder versions. And on those schemes, if there were two cylinders, one cylinder worked on the brakes of each truck. Having a mix of braking systems in a particular train was a headache because the LN and PC systems were refinements to improve brake performance when making an emergency stop, which became important as speeds increased and multiple sections were being run on short headway. But if such cars were mixed with cars having the PM system, uneven braking could occur, and cars would run in the slack in couplers when a stop occurred, and they'd bump against each other. Most cars with the PC system were modified in the late 1920s to provide a graduated release feature and designated PCM in Pullman records. Other cars were changed to the UC system to get away from the complications. So here's a picture of the PM scheme, which was essentially the same as the K freight car brakes that were being used at the time, except that the reservoir and the cylinder are separate. Here's the LN scheme. Note adding the supplementary reservoir and a type L triple valve. Here's the PC scheme that I mentioned. And while it may well have performed, there were an awful lot of links and pins to keep adjusted and lubricated. And it was probably pretty complex to work on. So some railroads liked them, including New York Central, which had a long history of installing them on cars that it built for itself. But other railroads stayed away from them. Here's the UC scheme that was generally regarded as the state of the art after it was developed and lasted until throughout the period of heavyweight car construction. Now you might ask, why do we care about passenger car brakes? Well, for one thing, they're a visible detail on the model and worthy of getting it right. And unfortunately, few models that we see commercially have anything other than a UC single cylinder brake scheme, whether or not the car in question had that. The brakes on a particular car frequently are a hint at what railroad the car was built for. As I mentioned, New York Central liked PC brakes, and Pennsy didn't, probably due to different operational patterns. Here's a summary of the cars built to Plan 2505, and I've used orange shading to show those that I believe were built for New York Central assignment, although in the last lot, it says they were built for general service, but both the names and the brake selection suggests that they were probably New York Central. The information in the Pullman car database that Tom Madden graciously made available shows that all of the initial 8 had PM brake system, but the records elsewhere indicate that these last 4 had LM schemes, and the first 4 received PC brakes by 1925, consistent with New York Central preferences. The first 4 names are locations in the Adirondacks, and the latter 4 locations in Ohio and Indiana and Pennsylvania. The more numerous 7-compartment, 2 drawing room cars, many lots were clearly built for railroads other than New York Central, but at least a few were probably built for the New York Central, or at least assigned there quite early, because again, their brake schemes were changed to type PC at dates up to 1926. In addition, the three that I mentioned earlier of the last lot, Plan 2522C, they're highlighted. I should mention on these cars in the first lot, they had shopping dates in the Buffalo shops in 1917 to 1919 period, and very likely that was the point at which their brakes were changed. The last group, the 8 compartment observation cars, all were built for New York Central service, and the brakes were changed to type PC beginning in 1912, essentially immediately after the scheme was developed. Pullman lines. The Pullman operating department designated round-trip service between a particular city pair on a particular set of trains as a line. And unfortunately, these lines were usually not shown in either the official guide or the applicable railroad's public timetables, so it's frequently hard to make good use of this information. A car could operate in more than one line in a continuous trip, and it could operate in a different line when it was returning. And more than one car could operate within a given line. I'll show examples in a moment. Pullman's 1915 schedule of lines was reprinted by Arthur Dubin, but even the reprints are very difficult to find. I was fortunate to have access to a copy at the Illinois Railway Museum. Here's a sample listing for line 1500 on the Lakeshore Limited. Note that in addition to giving the specific limited train that this line was assigned to, it says that it consisted of both sleeping and compartment observation cars. It summarizes the train schedule on the westbound and the eastbound runs. It also notes that there was a buffet car reported under a different line and talks a little about the complications of how this car operated. Here's a summary from that same listing of Pullman lines with all room cars as of July 15th, 1915. The 20th Century Limited is probably the simplest, since the cars went west and returned east on the same train. 4 cars were required to cover this New York and any New York to Chicago line at that time, but there was also a car that ran on the Lakeshore Limited westbound, and it returned on the eastbound train number 6, and the times permitted 2 cars to cover the line. The New York to Chicago compartment observation car that we saw on the earlier, the so-called 6 compartment cars was probably was operated in 3 stages or sections. First, westbound from New York to Chicago. Then it returned from Chicago to Detroit overnight and laid over during the day, then was connected to the Detroiter, leaving in the evening, and ran back to New York. So 3 cars would have been required to cover this service. Many of us are modelers, and these cars represent an unmet need in the modeling. There are plastic car models of heavyweight cars that focused on generic cars of the late era, built between 1923 and 1932. And these are readily distinguished because they were 1 foot longer than the earlier cars, which gave Pullman a little increase in the revenue space. And typically they used this to replace a compartment with a drawing room and increase the potential revenue from each trip. So all room car plans built between 1923 and 1930 included the Plan 3523 cars 6 compartments, and 3 drawing rooms. Initially, cars of this type had names of composers and authors, and later lots had names beginning Glen Echo, Glen Ellen, and so forth. Plan 3959 replaced previous observation car designs with 3 compartments and 2 drawing rooms. In New York Central Service, the car names began Central, this, that, and the other. Lastly, Plan 3583 was a 7 drawing room car. It was designed initially for Santa Fe trains between Chicago and Los Angeles, and later applied to the 20th Century Limited. Now, even if you look back at the Walthers tin plate kits of the 1980s, the only cars that are available based on pre-1923 prototypes were various cars having sections. And these just don't fit the cars we're looking at. The only brass model I've been able to find for any of these cars is a Soho model that claims to be Plan 2522C, President Washington. And the photos from an eBay listing of this car are shown, and I've identified some shortcomings. On the room side of the cars, the single windows for drawing rooms should be here, where there is one, and here, fine, but none in the middle. There were no drawing rooms in the middle that would have had annexes. There should be a second single window at the right end for the general toilet. So there's one single window too many, and they're in the wrong place. The single windows are appropriate for both 2522C as well as the earlier lot 2522B, but they're more evenly spaced, not bunched together as shown here. The President cars, Plan 2522C, were built with a pediment end, which is not shown here, and top equalizer trucks. And although President Harrison received drop equalizer trucks when it was air conditioned, this is not an air conditioned car. There's no duct on either side of the clerestory. In addition, although the model has 2 battery boxes and a single brake cylinder, there should be another air reservoir for the UC air brake system on the late cars that this car supposedly is labeled for. The modeling in any case is quite simplified because brake shoes, brake levers, rods, and air lines are not modeled. These errors are not evident in the Traeger drawing shown by Karsten, but he does depict the car. He does not depict the car ends. Here's a very nice drawing by John Fisella of Kano, Plan 2540F. Note that he shows it with the buffet and the enclosed vestibule as opposed to plans G and H, where it was modified for service during World War II.
Alex, you have about 5 minutes.
Thank you. Here's another very nice model, probably from a very limited layout because it's 1:32 scale, of Cardinal Bonzano, the Cardinals train, temporary use, and it's shown in Theodore Schrade's interesting book, The Sleeping Car. Here's an overview of the references and sources that I used in developing this presentation. William Foster's 1923 calendar painting is something we've probably all seen in various contexts as the centuries pass in the night. And I think it's fitting into this discussion. The car shown is a Plan 2540 observation car. And in 1923, it was in its last months of assignment to the century, but it will continue in less prominent roles for decades to come. I'm now finished and look forward to your questions. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, I guess.
A question for Alex just came up. Who were Pullman's primary competitors?
Okay, in the period under discussion, Pullman didn't have any competition. They simply ran essentially all sleeping car service in the United States and a large share, essentially all service in Mexico and a large share in Canada. Now, I'm less familiar with who ran what in Canada, except the fact that both Canadian Pacific and Canadian National had some Pullman lines, as well as some services they ran themselves. Pullman basically bought out its competitors. The Wagner car lines, which had formerly been run by the New York Central, being an example, which they bought out about 1900, before the period of the steel cars we're discussing in this presentation. They were broken up in 1945 in a antitrust judgment prompted by the Budd Company, which resented being locked out of the market for constructing sleeping cars. And at that point, operations were split off into the Pullman Company and car building into Pullman Standard Car and Manufacturing, and those companies went their separate ways.
Thank you, Alex.
Sure. Anything else? Well, thank you all for your interest and attention.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was very enjoyable and well detailed and thought out. We're going to take a 10-minute intermission here. At that point, we're going to welcome Jeff English with his presentation of Around the Oval and a description of the various different heralds that the New York Central System has used over its lifetime. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes and start again. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me just get my screen up here. So we go from passenger cars to freight cars. When I originally put this show together, I was envisioning being in a room with people. And one thing I always like to start out with is to ask what era people are modeling, and I won't be able to ask that this time. But I always go on the assumption that most people are modeling the 1950s, either early or late. The transition from steam to diesel seems to be very popular. So a lot of this presentation is geared around that presumption, but it's not necessarily a requirement. So let me go ahead here. Okay, so always like to start out by just saying thanks to people who contributed, mainly sources of photos. Seth Lakin helped me out, and it's a really useful thing to look at the two-part article by Lansdale back a very long time ago, covering the evolution of the New York Central Oval. That's a very handy reference. So today's topics, I'm going to go over a brief history of the New York Central and how the subsidiaries fit together. I'm not going to be covering the 19th century. The focus is on freight cars and on understanding the evolutionary changes. There won't be a learning evaluation at the end, but you should gain an understanding of how to know how paint and lettering features are appropriate for models in your fleet for your era of choice. So the Vanderbilt Empire, most of the modern New York Central had been assembled at the beginning of the century. So you have all these components which were still separate companies, subsidiaries under the Vanderbilt Empire, which actually didn't have a corporate name yet, as far as I know. They were just various companies owned by members of the Vanderbilt family. So some things happened, obviously, in the 20th century. We had the merger of the New York Central and Hudson River with the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern. That was in 1914. The acquisition of the Toledo and Ohio Central and many subsidiaries, such as Hocking Valley, I'm not quite sure about that, Zanesville and Western, et cetera. There, a lot of stuff happened there, which I'm not going to get into. The next important thing that happened was the integration of rolling stock numbering in 1935. And this was a system-wide renumbering with the exceptions of Michigan Central, which came a few years later, and Boston and Albany, which came after the war. Some subsidiaries continued separately all the way into the PC era. And I'm not going to talk about after the merger. Pittsburgh and Lake Erie is probably the one that has the most action going on after the PC merger. Canada Southern, Peoria and Eastern, and Indiana Harbor Belt, which was joint ownership with other railroads, mainly Milwaukee Road, but it was more than that. So these subsidiaries, you had the nickel plate, which the New York Central owned. A lot of people forget that or don't know it. It was divested by order of the ICC in 1916. I'm not sure why I'm showing 1917 here. I had made some adjustments to this, but they're not showing up. Lake Erie and Western was divested to the nickel plate in the early 20s, I think 1922 to be exact. Cincinnati Northern was merged into the Big Four in the 1920s. Chicago, Indiana, and Southern was merged into the New York Central in 1950. And the Rutland was wholly owned by the New York Central for a brief time in the early 20th century, and after 1911, jointly owned between the New York Central and the New Haven until 1950, when the New York Central divested of any interest in the Rutland. So, talking about freight cars, early on, it appears that no freight cars received a predecessor or subsidiary herald or logo after the adoption of the New York Central Line's oval, which was about 1905. Much later, many freight cars, P&LE and the Peoria and Eastern, began receiving slogans. This is late 50s and later than that. The SERS, the Steel Centers, and Quicker via Peoria. No significant deviation from the parent road's New York Central Herald. There's some minor exceptions to that, which is, it's a deviation, but it's not a significant deviation. So we'll get to that. Okay, so late in the game, and I'm saying like late 60s, just before the PC merger, they revived the Boston and Albany reporting mark. I'm not sure what the reason for that, but it probably had to do with car accounting or helping clerks to segregate a certain fleet of hopper cars. So you see a lot of photos of some triple hoppers with B&A reporting marks without the name Boston and Albany spelled out. Those are cars that got relettered from New York Central to B&A in about 1967. And lots of those survived into Conrail in that appearance. The TOC reporting mark was revived by Penn Central. I believe it was a financial maneuver so that the leaseholder on the cars would have protection from the fact that Penn Central was bankrupt. And Toledo and Ohio Central was still a paper subsidiary that was not bankrupt. So, all right. So some roads were divested or merged earlier than 1935. So the Rutland, as I said, was half divested to the New Haven in 1911. The nickel plate, that was 1916. Lake Erie and Western, 1922. Toledo and Ohio Central was merged in the early 20s, and likewise the Cincinnati Northern by the mid-20s. And here's the Rutland, just as an illustration. And you can see this car is substantially the 40-foot, 40-ton car, New York Central design, built in large numbers, many thousands of cars just before World War I for New York Central and subsidiaries. However, the Rutland's 500 cars were built in 1924, nearly identical design. The only variation was the corrugated ends. As you can see in this picture, there's 6 ribs on the top and 8 in the bottom, where all the New York Central cars were 7/7, except for a small number of Cincinnati Northern cars also built in 1924. They were also 6/8. The other thing that you can see, which I think I can use my cursor to point to that, right here, this gusset is elongated. On the New York Central cars, they were an equal 45-degree angle. So that's a slight difference. Other than that, these cars were pretty much the New York Central design. Okay, nickel plate. So here's a nickel plate car built to the New York Central standard in 1916. It's a 36-foot car. These were about the last 36-foot cars built. They also happen to be the last new box cars before the New York Central divested of the nickel plate. They were never renumbered before divestiture, and most likely never had a New York Central oval applied, and I do not know what the reason for that would have been. You see many builders' photos of other subsidiaries had the New York Central oval applied. So this one, I don't know why. Now, Lake Erie and Western, these two photos are not of the same class of cars, so don't try to transfer anything there. But you can see the Lake Erie and Western car, the older photo with the New York Central lines oval herald, and then a 1930 photo of a car still in the paint and lettering that was applied when it was a New York Central subsidiary, but you can see the rectangle where it says Nickel Plate Road, that's been painted over the New York Central lines oval. So, you know, other than the change from New York Central to nickel plate, this car is substantially what it would have looked like when it was a subsidiary of the Central. So all the Roman lettering and the arrangement of stenciling is substantially what would have been the New York Central standard of the time. Okay, Toledo and Ohio Central. This is the USRA double sheath car as designed for the USRA. These were the last new box cars lettered for the TNOC, and they were renumbered into the New York Central number series in the early 20s. And all of the TNOC cars were gone from the registers by 1930. So, you know, this is a nice looking car, and you can see the stenciling is consistent with World War I era. Now we get into the 1920s. Here's a Cincinnati Northern car to the spec 486. This is the all steel design, which New York Central and subsidiaries had tens of thousands of these cars. So this is a very significant car, many different lots. Cincinnati Northern got a few hundred of these. I don't remember the exact number. These, again, were the last new box cars that were lettered Cincinnati Northern. They were renumbered into Big Four by the early 30s, and then in 1935 renumbering got New York Central numbers. A handful of them, though, remained with the NOR reporting marks and the 4-digit numbers right up until 1950. You can also see, I've kind of glossed over this, the S prefix on the number. This was a practice the New York Central engaged in from the early 20s to the end of the 20s. It had to do with accounting for car repairs and also for routing of empty cars, but it was deemed no longer needed by the end of the 20s. So if you see a car of any car type with an S prefix, that means it was lettered that way in the 1920s. So, most freight cars would get repainted probably about every 10 years, some more frequently than that. So it would be unusual to have a car with an S prefix much past the beginning of World War II, I'm sorry. Okay, so the general renumbering in 1935, all freight cars were subject to the renumbering with the asterisk exceptions, with discontinued subsidiaries integrated into the New York Central series. So these subsidiaries that kept going were not included in this renumbering. Boston, Albany, Canada Southern, Michigan Central, Peoria and Eastern, and the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. But the main thing is all the remaining other subsidiaries, the Big Four, the Cincinnati Northern, Toledo and Ohio Central, any cars that were still in a prior number series began to be remarked with NYC reporting marks and a new number in almost all cases. And we'll get to some details of that later. And a handful of cars appear to have survived into the early 50s, maybe. Hard to say. And again, the end of the S prefix. And almost simultaneously with the renumbering, the change in the oval from New York Central lines to New York Central system. This was not absolutely simultaneous, and I don't understand why, because it would have made sense. Anyway, that's the way it is. So here's the car. Yes?
Could you please move your cursor out of the middle of the slide? Thank you.
Oh, sure. You're welcome. So in 1935, these renumbering. So here's an example of Spec 914 cars. This car is 1,000 cars built for the Big Four in 1928. And these are taller than the Spec 486, but otherwise a very similar design, and they have the end doors. So the photo is probably early 1930s. Don't know exactly when it is, but it's very likely the as-built paint job. Has the New York Central lines in the oval. It's got a black background in the oval. You can see the reporting marks. CCC and St. L have all the periods in them. It's got the S prefix. And the way the dimensional data is configured is consistent with the late 1920s. So presumably, even though it's not when the car is new, it's still the as-built paint scheme. And then just a sliver of a photo, because the subject of the photo was not the New York Central 203333, but the car happened to show up. That's a car from the same lot, 578 or 585, after being renumbered from Big Four to New York Central. So that's the only photographic view that I can show you of a car renumbered. And you can see the number is a completely different series. There's no periods in the reporting marks. You've got the stencil lines above and below the reporting marks and number, and dimensional data is changed to the then current AAR standard. And as you can see, in April 1946, there were only 18 cars left that were in the register under the CCC and St. L reporting marks. 946 out of those 1,000 cars had been renumbered into the New York Central 203,000. So there's an example of a car that would have been commonly seen from the time they were built right up into the end of the 50s, probably, but very few cars still Big Four after World War II. And here's an example of a car. I think this is a pretty nice paint job by a model railroad club. This is in a recent issue of RMC in their new products announcements. And, you know, I encourage you, if you like the paint scheme, give the club your support, buy the car for them. But they did a nice lettering job of the as-built paint job with all the 1920s lettering, except the oval should have a black background. But the car shell is a 1950s design car that is completely inappropriate. So this is a good example of why this clinic, I got the idea to do this, is to just give people a heads up to watch out for stuff that's out there and to be aware of how to make your eras be consistent. Okay, so in the change from lines to system, here's the August 1935 drawing, which was not superseded until 1955. So all your freight cars that are lettered, well, I should say box cars. I will cover other freight cars. Box cars lettered from 1935 until 1954 and into early 55 should have this oval logo, which is 48 inches wide. And the only difference from before is changing the word lines to system. So there's a lot of longevity to the New York Central Oval in this style. Okay, so here's, I'm including this because this is another one of these modeler's traps. Panel side rebuilds of USRA hoppers. Nice looking car, it's attractive. Models are available in many different scales. The model on the upper photo happens to be an S scale model. And here's something with hopper cars. When you see a hopper car with a number in the series 300,000 or 400,000, that's the pre-1935 renumber. So after 1935, this car would have a different number, most likely in the 800,000. Likewise, the prototype photo, the Big 4 car, that car would have been renumbered next time it got repainted after 1935 into a New York Central series in the 800,000. And in this particular case, I picked these cars because it just so happens the S-scale model is a model of lot 387H. 3 cars were rebuilt with a panel size. This was, like a demonstration to see how these panels worked in 1933. And the 3 cars were renumbered to the 850,000 in 1935. The Big 4 cars were also part of a similar, let's try these out. 3 cars were rebuilt in 1935. So just before the renumbering and the change of the oval from lines to system, 3 cars were done with the Big 4 lettering. Then in 1935, the renumbering comes and you introduce the New York Central 850,000 series, of which there were only 6 cars, which were these two groups of 3 each. And as you can see, the data from the 1946 official register, there were no cars left in the earlier original schemes, and all 6 cars were in the 850,000 series. So that's an example of something that, there's models out there in both the Big 4 scheme and the New York Central scheme. If you're modeling post-war, not really appropriate. Okay, so Michigan Central, I don't know why they were not included in the 1935 renumbering, but it's clear from the migration of numbering that they started being subsumed into New York Central about 1940. So here's an example of gondola. This is a builder's photo, built in 1922. The renumbering would have begun in 1940, and by 1946, only 6 years later, 8 cars still in Michigan Central and 12 in New York Central. And the reason those numbers are low because the lot should have 49 cars in it, but there's only 20 accounted for in this number series, is because gondolas got a lot of reconfiguration. You can see, I picked this photo because you're looking down into the car. This car has drop doors in the floor. Many cars got reconfigured where they eliminated drop doors, and if they had wood floors or steel floors, they might have gotten different number series. So gondolas are complicated. But I just wanted to show this as a car that was Michigan Central, and you can see the migration in the numbering from NC to NYC. Here's another Michigan Central car, another of the Spec 486 taller version, built in 1926. And you can see this renumbering was not going rapidly. In 1946, there were still 292 of the 1,000 cars in Michigan Central, 12 cars in New York Central. And again, the reason there's way fewer than 1,000 cars is because I believe many of these cars were also put into pool service, probably for auto parts service. And that's a whole nother story that I don't want to spend a lot of time on, but suffice to say, when cars are put into pool service, they may have only lasted in that pool for a year or so and then would come back to either their original number series or go into a different pool. And tracking the pools is something I have not tackled yet. So it's hard to account for how many of these original 1,000 cars really did exist. Okay, so in 1944, for reasons that probably have to do with inventorying black paint, they changed the oval by eliminating the black background. And this practice continued until the end of Gothic lettering in 1955. So what this means is, and this is important when you're looking at models and production models and also sets of decals you're considering using. Any freight car with no black background in the oval was painted between early 1944 and late 1955. That's it. And if they're painted before 1944, they should always have a black background. And there are errors in models in that regard as well. All right, so here's a little quiz. And if I had a room full of live people, you could check your boxes there. What do you think? Does this car have a black background, yes or no? And the answer is yes. But it's really hard to tell, and that's kind of the point of this fun little quiz, is that judging from photos is tricky and risky. Here's another one. This is a builder's photo. What do you think? Black background, yes or no? And the answer is no. This car is built, you might be able to read it on your screen, September 1944. So this is after the drawing revision was made to take the black out of the background. Okay, Boston, Albany. Now we're after World War II. And the B&A, I believe, was merged into the New York Central in 1950. And probably the most famous group of boxcars on the Boston Albany were these 1,000 cars in the 50,000 series, lot 492B, built in 1924. And notice there's no oval. These cars were built without an oval. They never had an oval when they had the B&A reporting mark. So the merger occurred in 1950. They began to be renumbered into the New York Central series in the 38,000s. And by 1956, only 92 cars left B&A and 857 cars New York Central. So in terms of appearance compared to the car in the photo, just change the V&A to NYC, change the number series from 50,000 to 38,000, and probably with the same 3 digits as each individual car would get renumbered. And then that Boston Albany disappears, and the New York Central oval without a black background would be included. Okay, Canada Southern. Canada Southern probably was kept separate because it allowed Canadian assets to be accounted for separately. And one thing for sure is this facilitated intra-Canada shipments. The idea being that if you brought a US-owned car across the border, there were rules on how long it could be in Canada before import duty would be charged and things like that. So they wanted to avoid all that. So for shipments that were shipped from a point in Canada to a point in Canada, better to have some cars that were Canadian accounted. So hence Canada Southern was kept with a fleet of cars. And this is a photo showing an example of that. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink of water here. Peoria and Eastern is kind of fun because they were a subsidiary way back before the Oval began in 1905. And here's a car built right about that era. Builder's photo with the New York Central Lines logo on it. That shows you how far back P&E goes. And they kept getting cars lettered independently for them. Here's the Spec 486 cars that they got as built and later in life. So you see the S prefix and the as built. New York Central Lines, got a black background. And that all the data is consistent with standard practices in the 1920s. And you can see the later photo, which is 1958. Very similar car, same number series, or actually it's another lot of 100 cars. So it's an adjacent number series. Now you've got the dimensional data has been changed to the AAR practice that started in the 1930s. You still have Peoria and Eastern spelled out, but now you've got the stencil lined above and below, and the New York Central system on the oval. And depending on how old the paint is, if it's before 1944, that could have a black background. If it's after 1944, it should have no black background. And P&E cars kept being lettered into the cigar band era. Here's an example, and that's when the quicker via Peoria slogan came in. This car is probably painted in the early 60s because it has black ends and appears to be a black roof, and it's got the 12-foot wide cigar band herald. By 1964, they had gone to a much smaller cigar band herald, and they'd eliminated the black paint on the ends and roof. At least New York Central standard. Whether P&E did those things, hard to say. And then P&E lasted into Penn Central as a separate company. And this is a more modern car, but it still has the same number. It was not renumbered. And you can see they're using Penn Central style lettering on this car with the PC Worms logo. Just keep a note of that for later consumption. Now we're going to talk about Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. P&LE had a very large fleet of freight cars that served the steel industry. And what does that mean? It means open top cars, hoppers, gondolas, flat cars. They had a large number of cars, some of which you can see in this photo and also this one. And one thing I'd like to note, this is 1948. You can see New York Central ovals on many of the cars in the picture. In some cases, the weathering is so heavy, maybe it's there, but you can't see it. And you can also see in the background there a New York Central hopper with some pretty fresh paint. So again, P&LE was a subsidiary from before the beginning of the oval. And here's a builder's photo of a car with no oval because it was built before the oval came. And so this lettering is of its time, and even if this car survived very long, the lettering would have changed probably before 1910. I put this car in because there's a kit available in HO for modeling this. Is the USRA single sheath car rebuilt with steel sides. Tichy makes a kit in HO. Many people have built this. It's a pretty accurate model. They were rebuilt in 1934. And I don't know the exact story of the timing of Pittsburgh, McKeesport, and Youghiogheny as a P&LE subsidiary, the timing of when they decided to change from the P. Mickey to P&LE, but it was pretty quick. But some P. Mickey cars in this particular lot stayed in P. Mickey reporting marks as late as 1950. So that's interesting, but it's much higher number of them were going around with P&LE reporting mark. Okay, in 1955, there were many significant changes in the way freight cars were decorated on the New York Central. All the lettering on the car changed from Roman to Gothic, and the style of the Gothic on the slide is meaningless. The oval changed significantly. All the lettering changed from Roman to Gothic. And if you look at the image on the right, which is that drawing U57621, not only is all the lettering Gothic, but you can see they didn't paste over the stencil lines in all cases. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But the other thing is, this is very subtle. Besides the fact that the oval is about 6 inches wider, it's also a bit fatter, and the rounding of the curvature gets a little sharper at each end, left and right. So it kind of looks like a football. You might not notice that until it's pointed out to you, and then you can't not notice it. So it's really easy in any photo to tell just from the shape of the oval. Oh, was this car stenciled before or after 1955? Well, it's easy to tell. So the same oval was applied to Peoria and Eastern and Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. And this does apply only to box cars. Other cars, there's subtle variations, which I'm not going to delve into today, but I could at a later presentation. So here's a P&LE car. The upper photo happens to be, again, one of those USRA rebuilds, and it shows how it's been relettered from P. Mickey to P&LE. And that's a paint scheme that's appropriate to the post-war era. The relay date is 1954. This is what the car would have looked like in that time frame. The lower photo shows an AAR boxcar, but it's showing a paint scheme that started post-1955, and the block lettering Pittsburgh and Lake Erie with the slogan "Service the Steel Centers" started about 1958. I don't have an exact date on that, but it clearly caught the attention of the photographer in 1959 to photograph this freshly painted car. And again, you can see that post-1955 oval is quite identifiably different from the older oval in the car in the upper photo. What am I doing for time? I guess I'm doing okay here. So here's some hopper cars that show you some variations. The upper car, so this is post-1955. It's got the Gothic lettering and the New York Central cigar band logo, but it's just a white stencil on a black background. As far as I know, only Pittsburgh and Lake Erie did this. And, it was something that was not sanctioned by the parent road, but P&LE had some independence. But it obviously saved some money compared to doing the 3-color red, white, and black, which the regular cigar band would have said. On the lower photo, again, this is into the Penn Central era. You see the PC worms, but the lettering is still the New York Central era Century Gothic lettering. And I think that has to do with the fact that P&LE was much more independent of Penn Central than, say, the Peoria and Eastern was. I don't know the facts there, but we do know that P&LE survived the PC bankruptcy and became an independent railroad, where the Peoria and Eastern did not. And here's some covered hoppers which show the large block lettering, which was adopted. I'm not exactly sure when, but it was in the 60s, and some variations on the cigar band. These two cars are in the same lot, but the cigar bands are different. You can see the car on the right has the 3-color cigar band logo. Car on the left has just the black cigar band stencil on the gray background. Now, this is the one single most important slide of the entire presentation. And this is, I have to coin a new term. This is approximately exact. This graph is made by taking all of the entries in the official equipment registers over the time frame illustrated, ones that I've had access to. This is for box cars only. So if a car series is shown in the register and it shows a number of cars, that's put into the data, and it's all tabulated and converted into this graph. What makes it a little fudgy is the numbers are plus or minus a dozen out of 100,000 because of the way I accounted for when they showed some cars listed but hadn't entered a number yet. My method of showing that was putting in a -1. So when I add up all these numbers, I didn't account for a handful of -1s. The other thing is the registers that I have are not in equal distribution in their dates. So, the x-axis on the bottom is shown in a regular number series, but the points in the graph should be proportioned differently. The point is, it gives you the gist of what's important. Now, there's some things to see here. One is, at the beginning in 1930, the total is nearly 130,000 cars. And then by World War II, we're down to 70,000. That's a cut of nearly half. Well, what's going on there? The answer is that in 1930, you had a lot of very old cars. And when the Depression came on, all those cars were gotten rid of. There was a famous incident on the Pennsylvania Railroad where They burned several thousand of their XL class boxcars at night. I forget where it was, somewhere, probably Altoona, and it made the news, obviously. I don't think there was a comparable incident on the New York Central, but all these older cars were very low capacity. Some were even 20-ton capacity, but most were 30 or 40-ton capacity. And they were being superseded by more modern cars that had 50 tons or more capacity. And they also were much smaller in cubic capacity. So even though the numbers go from 130 to 70,000, the capacity to carry load was not reduced that much, even though there was a large economic contraction during the Depression. Okay, so having explained that, you can see the New York Central reporting marks, the large area on top, was less dominant when you had the large subsidiaries in the 30s, and then became dominant in the post-war era, with the exception of Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. And Peoria Eastern is in there, but it's so small, it hardly counts. And you can see Michigan Central and Big Four, as you would have expected, the numbers of cars declining in proportion to the parent New York Central. Until you get to about 1950, they're nearly all gone. And likewise, the Boston and Albany. One thing that's interesting is you can see where the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie is kind of a narrow sliver there about 1940. And the reason for that is because P&LE was not much of a boxcar railroad. It was all open-top cars until the 1950s. They started acquiring more boxcars because that's what market conditions called for. So you can see P&LE boxcars were a substantial presence right through the 50s and 60s. So again, this illustrates how if you find it attractive to want to have a subsidiary car, Michigan Central, Big Four, think about what era you're modeling, because if you're modeling after 1950, there's almost zero justification to having one of those cars. Now, that's a motivation for people to try modeling an earlier era. I don't know. Or maybe you're not that strict in your era as some people are, and that's fine too. But just to be aware that these are the historical facts. Okay, so just to say, New York Central System Historical Society is your resource. There's lots of drawings and photos. Look at the website, all kinds of good stuff going. And I'm open for questions.
Jeff, it doesn't look like we have any questions right now on YouTube. I have a non-boxcar question. I always see covered hoppers for the Central painted in gray. What kind of gray is that?
You mean the shade of gray?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is not something I've delved into, but I would say based on color photographs that I've been acquiring over the years, that it probably was not a single standard that they replicated consistently. Knowing all the pitfalls of, variations in photography and lighting and all that, you can argue all day. But it seems to me that there were some shades of gray that were very close to white, and some that had more of a medium gray that I don't think would be accounted for by those variations.
Okay, we do have a question from YouTube. Joe asks, when did PL&E locomotives lose the New York Central logo text and move to the large PL&E block lettering?
Well, I certainly don't know the answer to that, but I would guess that it happened in the 60s at the earliest. but I don't know.
I believe it was after the P&LE spun off of Penn Central.
Yes, which would have been, I think, at the end of the PC bankruptcy.
Yeah, 76 or shortly thereafter.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because the PC, because they owned a large block of shares in the P&LE, the P&LE couldn't become completely independent till the PC bankruptcy resolved PC's ownership of those shares.
Okay. Doesn't seem like we have any other questions coming in from YouTube. We'll take a break and we'll be back at the top of the hour with our next presentation.
Very good.
Thank you very much. The next presentation will be with Dave Mackay, and he will be talking about the 19,000 series of New York Central standard cabooses.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, Bob. I'm going to begin by looking at this slide a minute and giving you a little bit of history. This is a slide I took at the tender age of 13 back in Orangeburg, New York, with my used August C3 camera. In those days, to me, you can see my bicycle in the lower right corner. That's how I got there. When I was asked to make this presentation, in speaking with Seth Lakin, we couldn't quite figure out what to call it. Of course, in reality, these are not standard wooden cabooses for the New York Central, as we'll see in the next couple of slides. And they're not 19,000 series, because this one happens to be in the 18,000 series number. So other than being misnamed and mislabeled, to me, they are a New York Central caboose through and through, obviously, and we're going to look at them in a little bit greater detail in this presentation. So, how or why were they standard? Well, as I said, really, they were not. They are a line east caboose. They were made in great volume or great quantities. West Albany shops built some, Rochester Merchants Dispatch Transportation, Oswego shops built a lot of them, East Buffalo built some. The rosters I've seen have a place called Lafayette that built them, although I have no idea where Lafayette is. McKees Rocks built some, so they were all over the system in the east. But when you got west of Buffalo and you were on a line west other than the Lake Shore, and even then, they were not so ubiquitous. What we're looking at here in the upper left corner is a Michigan Central caboose, which there were loads of, which lasted all the way to the end, as you can tell by the lettering on that after hearing Jeff English's presentation about the football and the Gothic lettering. On the right next to it in black and white, you have a Big Four caboose, again, post 1955, with a black oval and Gothic lettering. The lower left corner is a much older photo. It's a Lakeshore, Michigan Southern caboose. And these are going to pop up much later in my presentation in a little bit different version. You may be a little bit surprised to see what the railroad did with those. And then on the right, you have Toledo and Ohio Central cabooses. And again, post 1955, black oval, Gothic lettering. So these cabooses made it all the way to 1968. One of the conditions of the Penn Central merger was that the New York Central get rid of their wooden cabooses. And henceforth, you had a lot of those little boxcar pieces as they looked on flat cars to make these things go away. So what else was on the system? Well, Boston and Albany had a caboose that looked very similar. Dimensionally, but the cupola was different. Notice those sliding windows on the sides and double pairs of windows on the end, not like the New York Central's cupola, but dimensionally overall height and width roughly the same. And check out those trucks. Not all Boston and Albany cabooses had them, and they didn't last too long. This is an early photo. But I do have a fellow that comes up to me every year at the Amherst train show in Springfield and wants to know if I know of anybody that makes those, because he's looking for a set. So maybe today with 3D printing, eventually they'll become available. But here you go. This is what we are, in quotes, calling a standard wood caboose. It has a unique cupola design. It's low profile because of the tunnels found predominantly on the Hudson Division coming up, obviously, along the Hudson River. As anyone who has studied anything, say, on the motive power of the New York Central, and you look at the overall clearance diagram that they had to stuff the Niagaras and the Mohawks and the Hudsons into, you'll come to realize that clearances were a big problem on the New York Central. Hence, the low cupola to clear the tunnels. These cupolas were found on other pieces of equipment that needed observation through the roof. We're going to look a little bit about what are called short standard, or what we call short standard cabooses, pacemaker cabooses, even flangers got these cupolas, which were unique to the New York Central. Okay. When I say family cabooses and using that cupola, here you go. You have on the left a short standard rebuilt from a Lakeshore and Michigan Southern car. If you recall that earlier slide in the lower left-hand corner of the black and white Lakeshore caboose, they were rebuilt and they came out looking a lot like this with the New York Central low-style cupola, although why you would need that in Illinois beats the heck out of me. World War II saw Lot 732 cabooses created out of boxcars. Later, those boxcars were plywooded over for a pacemaker freight service. And again, you've got the low style cupola on them. So they all resemble each other, but they are certainly different cabooses. The shorts being a little over 30 feet, and the later 732 / pacemakers over 41 feet long. Why don't we call them the 19,000 series? Well, we can't quite do that because the numbering ran from 17,006 to 20,085, but it was not inclusive. I've spent a couple of days trying to put a roster of these things together based on what I can get in books, magazines, internet, roster information for various other fellows of society. And there were all kinds of different cabooses stuck in the middle of these things. The pacemaker cabooses followed, but there are other styles of cabooses, especially in the 18,000s, with higher cupolas and different designs in the numbering system. There does not appear to be any rationalized or rational standard to how these things were numbered. As much as we modelers like rules and regulations to follow when doing things, my suggestion is always dig up some photos. There's so many variants and so many changes that have happened to these things over their lifetime that you cannot be absolutely sure without some kind of photograph to determine what you're doing. These things were built starting about 1919, or some of them as early as 1907, all the way into the late 20s, depending on what shop you're looking at and which division you're looking at. So that is a lot of identical cabooses, except they're not. There's over 1,000 of them, but there's a lot of little nuances that make you crazy. I've been working as the head of the committee to try to have a model of these produced in HO. It's been a long drawn out slugging process to get it done. The people I'm working with are a little company that it takes a long time for things to happen. But they've asked me to detail all the differences and what we would like to see in the model, and hence the results of that research on my part is a large part of this presentation. Starting off with the trucks. They were Bettendorf trucks. They started off as T-section trucks, and we'll look at a photo of them shortly. T-section trucks were also found in a lot of boxcars in the early turn of the century. I don't know whether they were repurposed into the cabooses or started off new under the cabooses, but in the beginning, up into the 30s, you would find T-section Bettendorf trucks with leaf springs under the majority of these cars. As those trucks began to fail, U-section Bettendorfs were substituted. And again, we'll look at pictures of those in another slide or two. There were two styles of roof walk as best we can determine. There were originals, which I'll look at a photo and some drawings, and there was a later simplified version, but not all cabooses got the simplified version. Some of them stayed right up to the end with the original, more complicated, wider roof board layouts. Siding, they were built as tongue and groove. Most were covered with plywood when they were refurbished or repaired in the late 50s. Then they were re-lettered with the Gothic lettering and the black and white football, although not all of them got plywood. It was depending on the condition of the sides. Corner posts are another conundrum. We have photos, which you'll see shortly, where the corners are rounded. Some of them are squared. I don't know if they were due to repairs or different shops, carpenter foreman just deciding to deviate from the plans or do something different. There are no notations in our plans as to what to do and how to do it in making these cars. Cupola set of windows got blanked off on some cars in the 60s. Again, when the plywood was put on, I guess it was more durable to have plywood than glass. And that certainly makes sense. I do remember in the 60s how kids used to like to throw rocks at trains a lot. So I can see where plywood is the thing to do. Best I can determine, none of these cars were built with dry hopper toilets, but some of them were added in, again, the 50s and the 60s, but not all cars. You can tell where you definitely have a toilet or a vent over the toilet closet, as it were, that there is one in there, but not all photographs interior-wise or others show them. And of course, we have the change in lettering from when they were built with Railroad Roman and then change into Century Gothic with the football in 1955-56. So trucks. This is a modeling presentation. So how do we do some of this stuff? Well, it's not easy. The truck on the left is a T-section Bettendorf under a caboose. It's missing a journal box cover, as you can see. Notice the bottom of the side frame is curved. Now, this was a discussion up on one of the railroad websites that we participate and monitor about 6 months ago. And I know that there is someone out there who has gone and had these done in 3D printing. I believe he got a hold of Rich Stoving, who dug out a drawing for him and had them done. I think it was an N scale. But I can't swear to any of that. But if you want that accurate a truck, that's the only way I know of to get one at this time. The only thing that's available on the market is Katie's T-section Bettendorf, which is close, but it doesn't have leaf springs and it doesn't have the rounded bottom. I've used these and I've substituted brass, phosphor bronze leaf springs that I had in my junk box from I don't know where in lieu of the coil springs. And with my eyesight being what it is from 3 feet away, it works for me. But hopefully when we get the model done, we will have the correct truck of the correct style done. Oh, somebody has already posted. Tom Long, thank you very much. Keystone Models and N Scale has them. Okay. Here's your U-section truck. You can get these from Tahoe Model Works. It's a Model 205. The Barber Casting Company bought the Bettendorf patterns because their Bettendorf goes back many, many, many years to their early 20s, if not further, and made this truck up into the 70s. These were also found under the pacemaker cabooses as well as the bay window cabooses. And this is pretty much what the New York Central used when they needed a caboose truck as they failed under the wooden cars or the 19,000 cars. Now, I'm going to stop here a second because I say wooden cars, and what I really need to explain is these are wooden bodied cars. These were steel framed cars. Even though they had truss rods and queen posts, they were strictly to hold up the sides. They were not in any way to be used. The truss rods were not used structurally for the strength of the car. They were a steel underframe. Hence, you'll see them behind steam locomotives and in the middle of freight trains. There were no special handling requirements for these cars. They were a robust steel framed car, just the bodies themselves were wood. Okay. So what cars got what? Well, here's an interesting picture. I got a T section on the left and I got a U section on the right. And as I said, as they failed, they replaced them, but unlike modelers, they didn't replace both of them. Railroad being as frugal as it appeared to be, it's kind of use it up, wear it out, and then change it out. So this is not a unique photograph, believe it or not. I sat down and went through every photograph in the Society's photo collection of cabooses and put a spreadsheet together on what cars had what trucks. And there's got to be more than a half a dozen photos of cars that share two different style trucks. One of the other changes that I did not notice and did not document, but obviously these cars dating back to the World War I era were all built with K air brake systems. K air brakes were outlawed in interchange in the early 50s. These cars were all converted from, those remained in the mid 50s to AB brakes. I believe the car we're looking at right here is an AB braked car, but I would certainly defer to somebody who's better on those brakes than I am, because I am not a brake expert. I can tell the difference between them if you show me the reservoirs and the valves, but other than that, not so much. Okay. I had mentioned the roof walks, and there are different roof walks. This is a old car. Notice on the right, we are looking at a bay window caboose that says Penn Central. So you're looking at post-1968 photograph, and yet this has the original style of wooden roof walk. I'm going to try to move my cursor here a little bit. I have an arrow back here. There's a little bevel on the corner of this footboard sticking out. There's a bevel here, matching the side to the planking at the ladder, and the planking at the ladder runs from the overhang right up to the cupola windows, even though the center window's been blanked off. So this car has the newer blanked center window, but the older roof walk in a post-1968 photo where the car in theory shouldn't even exist, as the railroad's not supposed to be using wooden cars anymore to union agreement. Here are some drawings of what the two different versions look like. You can see the bevels on the original and the full roof walk on their right-hand side, and the later simplified version where there's a gap between the ladder running board and the cupola running board, and it's all squared off. And okay. And I've just been informed that KD has a T-section caboose truck with leaf springs with a flat bottom as well. Okay, thank you, Robert. KD's number is 1581. If somebody wants to make life a little easier for themselves. Again, this is a modeling presentation. Now, siding on these things, these were all built tongue and groove. And as you can tell, there's not a lot of side detail other than just a bunch of planks. We've got some marker lamp brackets in the corners, and the lettering is very, very basic. Railroad Roman number, and there's a little note down below it, which I can't quite make out. Not all cars have that. This is the way they were until 1955 or so, when things got renumbered. Now, why did my computer freeze up? Okay. In the late 50s, early 60s, they went to plywood sides. All right, the wood's tongue and groove, I apparently started to rot, and rather than rip the tongue and groove off and replace it, it was cheaper to plywood over it and paint it, and off she went. This is a newer car, obviously, with the black and white football and the Gothic lettering. Again, we've got a blank center window on this car, and both trucks match, being T-style. Corner posts. This is kind of interesting. Notice the corner posts on this car. There's a little bevel above the bottom where it's squared at the very, very bottom. And then it curves in all the way up to behind the marker lamp, and then it becomes square again. Most cars appear to have this feature when they have tongue and groove siding. Later on with plywood, it's kind of questionable whether the plywood stopped short of these corner posts or whether something was done at the corner posts. I really don't have an opinion one way or the other. The society, when we do, if we are successful getting the models done, it will be a tongue and groove side model. So I'm leaning towards the rounded corner posts, as most of them appear to be that way, but I'm not going to swear at 100%. Because look at this. There's your same corner, but now we've got a 90-degree corner post. The lantern hangs from the side, perpendicular to the tongue and groove siding, not off on a 45-degree angle like the rounded corner posts do, which is kind of an interesting way on some of the poorer photographs to determine what kind of corner post the car had, is to look for the marker lamp bracket and see how they did it. I haven't commented on the middle side window. There seems to be more permutations on what they did there than any other window on any other caboose I've ever seen. Sometimes you have screens, sometimes you have overhangs. This one has a screen and an overhang. I guess that's conductor must have spent most of his time there, because that's the window that seems to have gotten the most different treatments on how to make it more user-friendly, for lack of a description. Again, we've got the simple Railroad Roman and a number. I can't quite, I think it says Toledo Division below that. These cabooses, of course, most of these photos are in the day when they were assigned. We don't give much thought today to how cabooses were used in the railroad back in the day. But one of the reasons I think there were over 1,000 of these things is because every conductor had his own caboose. And at the end of the day, if they were not at their home terminal and they laid up, this was their home away from home. And it belonged to the conductor whose run it was. So every conductor had a caboose, and it was his. I do remember stories from my uncle and cousin who worked for the New York Central down in Weehawken from the late 50s and the early 60s, that the caboose track, everything was locked up, and woe be it to the guy who got into somebody's caboose and took something that wasn't his. Everybody kept their frying pans in their kitchen and their foodstuffs and their coffee, I suppose, especially in their caboose. And it was a private facility. Hence, this one's labeled exclusively for where it runs. Now, in the 50s or the late 50s, and this caboose has been repainted after 1955. We've got the black football, we've got the Gothic lettering. If we look to the left, you can see, my cursor stopped working, you can see the paint triangle that was adopted by the New York Central as to who repainted it, what paint was used, where it was repainted, and when it was repainted, and also the blanked off center window. We've gotten away from kerosene marker lamps, and we've got reflectors. If you recall my photograph in the very opening slide, there were actually construction horse flashers on that caboose that were used to delineate markers for the back of the train. All right, the toilet vents. As I mentioned before, they were not built with toilets. It's hard to document some of this stuff. The bottom drawing is from a railroad model craftsman in the early 1950s. And I can't tell you exactly which issue it was because it's buried in the bottom of my file cabinet someplace. But I had scanned it a long, long time ago. I'd saved the article and thrown the rest of the magazine away. But you can see next to the stove, there's a closet and a window, and there's nothing there. And there are other illustrations that indicate this was the way that they were, which kind of beats the heck out of me because I can't figure out what the crew did when Mother Nature called. But that's what they apparently had at the time. Here's Model Railroad's plan in 2004. We now have a toilet. Now, I am going to say I'm 99% sure that was a dry hopper because there were no service facilities for micro four toilets or retention tanks or anything like that back in the day. It was just a funnel with a hole in the floor predominantly. And you just made do as best you could. Now, how do we know what's going on inside when we can't get inside? You've got a toilet vent up here above the window. And this shows up in only Gothic leaded cars. I have never seen a railroad Roman non-heralded car with a toilet vent protruding through the roof. And again, I've gone through an entire spreadsheet to try to document what has what and what doesn't. Okay, let's see. Also, here we go, another issue, polling pockets. For those who don't remember or don't know, a polling pocket was used to push a car with a locomotive where you couldn't couple it together, where you might have been on an adjacent track or mostly that way, or had to get it further down where a locomotive couldn't go. Locomotives had long wooden poles on them, probably about 4 to 5, 6 inches in diameter with metal banding so that the poles wouldn't snap or break or split. And there was a hole or a pocket in the corner of the locomotive. And here there's one in the corner of the caboose. So you could conceivably pull a locomotive up on an adjacent track and hold the pole in between the two pockets and push it. This became illegal, I believe, in the mid-60s, hence maybe why this one doesn't have it. But it's quite peculiar. Again, no rhyme or reason to why they do or they don't. These are both round-cornered cabooses, as we can see. One has a blanked-off center cupola window. The other one doesn't. But they're both current paint jobs. You got the number over and New York Central over the door, only this is a reflectorized marker, and this one is probably still using marker lamps. Okay. How were they painted? Well, I've been down several schools of thought on this, and I'm going to share what I think is correct. I've heard it said that they were all red, although these pictures disagree. And I go by photographs more than I do by painting diagrams and people swearing to me an absolute fact. I do know that the railroad used what was called car cement to seal up leaky roofs on freight cars, passenger cars, and obviously imagine if there was a leak in a caboose roof, they would use it on a caboose roof as well. These roofs were canvas over wood. And I can't imagine canvas being terribly durable, especially in the steam locomotive days, which leads me to think that there was an abundance of car cement on top of these things to try to keep the water out. Now, in looking at the black in these two photos, one of them appears to have the running boards around the cupola black. The other one appears to have them in red. And I have seen photographs, but I couldn't find them for this presentation, of cars being repainted and the overspray from the sides covering large swatches of the sides of the roofs. And that would lead me to think that if you had a photograph, depending on the angle, it would appear that the roof was painted boxcar red as well as the caboose. These cars appear to be painted a little with a little more attention to neatness, and the black is a little more obvious, although the fascia board on 19955 on the right is missing on the one half of the caboose. You can obviously see the black roof canvas rolled down over the sides where it's nailed in place. That's how I'm going to be doing mine. That's how I think the models should be done. If anybody wants to engage me in conversation and change my mind, you're more than welcome to have a discussion with me. I think that's kind of justifies those decisions. Okay. As I was mentioning in the beginning, they were built as railroad Roman in the lettering no herald. Now, to me, this is not an appealing lettering style. This is as basic as you can get. However, this is the way they were from their inception into the 50s when the Gothic lettering and the football was applied. Notice this car has a awning or overhang over the center window as well. It doesn't have a sliding screen. It's got a sliding door. These are all, and it's an 18,000 series. So obviously 19,000s is a bit of a misnomer. You can see the truss rods. You can see the short queen posts. You can see the steel cross members. This is the way they started off, and this is the way they were until the very end. Here's another example of the football, the Gothic lettering, the Gothic herald, the paint triangle. The paint triangle, I've just been told it was started in the 40s. I thought it was in the 50s, but I'll take Jeff English's word that it was in the 40s. We do have drawings on it on our website that does explain how to read it and when it was done. This caboose still has the T-section trucks on it with the curved bottoms. Handrails, the end platform railings and the grabs were yellow. This one has the grabs on the cupola roof is yellow as well. I'm not going to swear to that all the time. I think this one is because the cupola looks like it's been freshly repaired and repainted. It still has the center window. You're looking at a 1966 photograph, still with the tongue and groove siding, but obviously we have the football and the Gothic lettering. We've got a silver smoke jack on this one. These cabooses burn coal for heating purposes from the day they were built till the day they were disposed of. They were never upgraded to any other fuel. I've never seen any oil stoves or anything in them like the bay windows got when they got rebuilt. I do remember the coal boxes in Weehawken on a caboose service track when I used to go take the bus down to Weehawken from where I lived and walk down Pershing Street in my early teen years to just watch what the railroad was doing. Notice how this caboose has a T-section truck on the right with a rear end and a U-section truck on the left end. There's no screen on the center window. There's no overhang on the center window. I believe, here's a question on the vertical grabs next to the doorway. That's an interesting thing because a lot of the HO models have those as horizontal. And I've yet to see a prototype picture of those grabs being horizontal. I think my brass LMB has it wrong. I think my Markland one has it wrong. I believe they were there to hold on to while you leaned over and hung or lit the marker lamp. Because if you look for steps, these are what are characteristically called Pullman style steps on the cabooses, where they go up on an angle or go down at an angle, and to reach the marker lamps from the platform was a bit of a stretch to get out there. Those handrails, I believe, were there to just to assist as a safety feature. There are different one-offs. As I started to go through and tried to come up with rules and regulations, that they were always painted like this, and they were always lettered like this, and they were always, they were, except when they weren't. Here's 3 different versions, all in what I'm going to call century green, in various stages of either poor photos or faded paint. One is a safety caboose. Obviously, it's got the green safety crosses or by the platform sides, and talks about safety in the bannering on the sides. But to say that they were all done this way or the other way, I've learned never to say never when people come up and suggest why not this, that, or the other, because there always seems to be an exception to the rules. There are also some different railroads that had them. Jeff English explained to us earlier how the Rutland was owned by New York Central for a while. I believe this was post-New York Central ownership, but the Rutland bought 12 kits from MDT in Rochester and assembled their own cabooses. Here is one of them in a later Green Mountain Gateway paint scheme, done up very nicely. This one did not receive a rebuilt cupola. I'm thinking somewhere about half the Rutland cabooses were rebuilt with taller cupolas over the years. This one happened not to get it, and it is one of, I don't know if this particular one is one, but many of these Rutland cabooses survived the Rutland. One is in Steamtown up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I believe one is up in Ulster, New York at the Department of Public Works garage. It used to be the Welcome Center when you got off the thruway at Route 28. I think there's a couple more around. I do have some information on that, but it's outside this presentation for the moment. But again, we're talking about modeling. So how do we do it? Well, until the society comes up with a ready-to-run kit, you have to go to our online Collingwood shop store. We sell several versions of it. I think this is the HO version, although someone would have to, I took this down off our website last night. Notice it has the early style running boards on it with the bevels at the intersections of the cupola running boards and the roof walk running board. It's got the full length running boards from the ladder on the short end of the roof. That one's got the center window blanked off, and adjacent to it, you'll see down on next to it is a open center window version. This is a kit we sell from AMB that is on our website in the tongue and groove version, so you can model these. If you want the plywood later version from the late 50s on with the football and the Gothic lettering, we have them as well. We have to give a tip of our hat to Seth Lakin, our modeling committee chair. He was instrumental in getting these kits, this one put together. He went to AMB and said, hey, you make the tongue and groove side ones. What would it take to just do the plywood one, being you've got all the tooling and all the die cutting and all the laser programming figured out? And they said, yeah, sure, we could do that. And this cut was the result. and they are available to you in our store as well at NYCSHS.net. If you really are into New York Central cabooses and like the whole family of them, as we've been looking at, you can get the original Lot 732 with the tongue and groove sides, which were converted from boxcars. They are also in our store as kits, and they build up into some very nice models. We also offer the pacemaker version with the plywood sides. So we've got you covered on a fair amount of cabooses for now until we get some more. It's been quite the experience to go into the details of these things and to look at the construction and the dates. And I'm still looking for information. If anybody happens to have any rosters, I'd be more than happy to incorporate them into my roster data. So once we do get to production on these things, we can be as accurate as possible. Here's another one. I mentioned Lakeshore, Michigan Southern. Here's another rebuilt short one like the Peoria and Easton. We're looking to take interest on these cars. Seth was able to get the longer Lot 732s made as a variation from the original wood kit. We're looking to make these as a variation of the original wood kit, but we need to collect a certain amount of pre-orders for people who are interested in these cars. And we don't have enough folk right now who want this. So if you think this is something that you would want to have, go to our store website and just click on interest, leave your name and your email, and we'll add you to the list. And when and if they become a reality, we'll let you know, and you too can own a kit for one of these cars. This is my introduction to the inside of the car. I remember these ads from being a little kid. I bring this up because not only is this the end of my presentation, but notice there is no dry hopper in the closet, which makes me think that these cabooses were not built with toilets of any kind or any accommodation for the employees, which I guess if you were running a local caboose or divisional run of 100 miles, you could live without that. So that's how I imagine they started out. I don't have anything else for the moment, but I do have access to the YouTube screen, although there was a 30-second time delay or so. If anybody has any other questions, I would be glad to try to address them in the next minute or so. Okay.
Dave, I've got a question. I
Sure.
noticed you had made comment about the vertical versus horizontal grabs next to the door of
Yes.
the caboose. I did note on the Rutland caboose that it actually had the horizontal ones, not the vertical.
Well, you know, it was a kit, so I guess whoever put it together, like most people, didn't read the directions until after they were done.
Ah, like me. You got a question here?
Okay.
Or two?
Any comment on the B&A wood cabooses without that? Well, to the best of my knowledge, the B&A cupolars, cabooses had cupolars. A lot of these were removed over the years. The woodworking in those things was rather intricate, and I've been on a couple of restored cabooses where they've done not such a good job trying to replicate what they were, because it's they're just quite involved and quite difficult. So I could see, especially in the late 60s on a local run, nobody was sitting up there anyway. So just rip it off, close it over, and be done with it. And there are a lot of cabooses that lost their cupolars in the 60s that way. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dave.
My pleasure.
And short intermission. Now let's people go grab something, bite to eat or snack or whatever.
Our next presenter is going to be Seth Lakin. He's going to talk to us about the model the society put out, the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern stations, which were also good for Lake Erie and Weston. So without any further ado, our modeling committee chairman, Mr. Seth Lakin.
Okay, thanks, Dave. There we go. Okay, as Dave said, I am the chairman of the Society's modeling committee. A little bit about me, I'm a fifth generation railroader. If you count a brother or two in that 5 count, I run commuter trains in and out of Chicago's LaSalle Street Station on the old Rock Island. So enough about me. Let's get to what we're talking about. We're talking about these Lakeshore Michigan Southern and subsidiary depots that were built between 1894 and 1904. Next slide here. I'd like to thank everybody who's taken a picture and documented experiences and especially shared them. You know, I was actually born in the Conrail era. Without people sharing their experiences and photos, none of this would have been happening today. So thank you to everyone that's taking care of that. So what we're going to look at today, there was 2 types of brick and stone depots on the Lakeshore Michigan Southern and subsidiaries. We're not going to look at we'll take 2 seconds and look at the one type, but focus on the second type here. So a couple variations of the depot, and as it's been said before, identical but different. And then toward the end, we're going to look at the HO scale and N scale versions of this depot and how to take a hacksaw to them and cut them apart and make them a little bit different. So where were these located? As we know, the Lakeshore Michigan Southern stretched from Buffalo to Chicago, some branches in Michigan, some branches in Ohio, a couple branches in Indiana. All these dots here represent the brick and stone depots. The blue dots represent the one depot that we'll quickly touch on. The orange dots represent the small versions of the depot. The red dots represent the larger versions, and then the yellow dots represent variations of those depots. And we'll look at each one of these real quick. And as we said before, both in Dave and Jeff's presentation, the Lake Erie and Western was a subsidiary till 1922, and there was 3 versions, 3 examples on the Lake Erie and Western. And the original New York, Chicago, and St. Louis, the nickel plate, also stretched from Buffalo to Chicago, sometimes paralleling just a couple hundred foot from the Lakeshore Michigan Southern, and that was control until 1916 when it was sold off and divested. So this is the first type of depot that we're just going to take a look at. This is Wauseon, Ohio. I'm calling it a high-peaked dormer, as you can see here. High peak dormer, and some of the details. The high peak dormers has a stone band all the way around, right above the windows, arched windows on the top of the side windows, and there's no stone between the windows. And then the brackets here is just one single post running from the pillar, I guess you would call it, up to the roof. So this is the depot that we're going to look at. I'm calling a low dormer version. This one happens to be at Sturgis, Michigan. And the low dormer, you can see the dormer is not as tall as the other one, with 3 little windows, a square window and then a arching window in the center. So some of the details that we're looking at here, as I said, stone between the windows. The bottom below the windows is all stone. Stone in the corners, stone around the windows. And then the brackets here have a vertical post and then the angled post with a post connecting to the top. And there's 2 versions, either a large version or a small version of this depot. So on the small version up here, we have a paired window, an entry door, the wood bay window or the wood operator's bay, an entry door, and then a paired window. Then on the larger versions, a paired window, a second paired window, the entry door, the operator's bay, another entry door, paired window, and paired window. On the ends, got the smaller version, just a single window and the baggage door. And on the larger versions, a single window, the baggage door, and a single window. On the other end of the depot, on the smaller versions, have two single windows, and then on the larger versions, a bank of 3 windows with stone between, where the smaller version has brick and stone between. And then on the street side of the depot, just like the front side of the track side of the depot, single window, entry door. This is 2 high windows for the restroom, single entry door, and a paired window. With the large version, paired window, entry door, the restroom, entry door, paired window. And the difference on the street side here is the smaller depots had this little bump out section, where the larger depots, since they were a little bit wider, did not need that. And we'll look at that in a minute here. Actually, this slide right here. This is from the Stryker Historical Society. And you can see a general waiting room on one side, the ticket office operator's bay in the middle, the men's restroom on one side, the ladies' restroom on the other side, connected to the larger waiting room, and then a men's waiting room on one side with a little baggage end on the other. So you can see an entry door here into the men's waiting room, entry door here into the general waiting room, and same thing on the street side of the depot. So our first example here is at Westfield, New York, 58 miles from Buffalo. This is about a 1915 depot, 1915 photo. This depot was built in 1904. We'll look at here in a minute. Earlier postcard. This depot is different from all the other ones, as it had a interurban. The Johnstown, Westfield, and Northwestern ran out of this depot from 1914 to 1950. And then you can see here the Chicago traction on English Street, also in front of the depot. Another view, this one looks, I believe, east, with the Chicago traction in the front. And again, another street side view. Another view, this one looking west. 1946 view with the Empire State Express in front of the depot. Looks like a passenger car with a freight motor alongside here. 1968 photo from Chuck Bowie. Still in railroad use. But here's a modern photo. This one differs, as you can see here, the passenger end, but on the freight end, instead of 2 paired windows, it actually has an extended baggage room for, I believe, for the interurban. So paired window, entry door, paired window, but then single window, baggage door, and single window. The track side looks almost the mirror to this, with the end being the same as a standard single window door, single window. Again, it's on the main line, so operated by CSX today. And then another street side view, you can see the paired window door, restroom door, paired window, and then the extended baggage room. Inside, it's now operated as a art gallery and an event center. Moving on about 15 miles further west to northeast Pennsylvania, we have a standard short depot, smaller depot, postcard view. Again, the Empire State Express passing in front of the depot. Again, the 1971, I believe it's a Chuck Bowie photo. Baggage cart still on the platform. And then this is a 2007 photo of what the depot kind of looks like today. The single window and door on the baggage end, paired window, door, operator's bay, and then so forth back on the other end. Another view looking back on the other side of the depot. This door here was originally a window, as we saw in that earlier postcard view that was cut in at some time. And a street side view with the little restroom bump out here. Again, Northeast happens to be one of the planned stops on the canceled bus trip for the previous convention. So this is why I originally put this presentation together, is to look at these depots, since the Northeast and I forget the other one would have been stops on the bus tour. Nice little train layout inside, memorabilia. And of course, being just a few miles from Erie, Pennsylvania, the Railroad Museum has a nice collection of General Electric locomotives that were built there in Erie, and New York Central U-25B happens to be parked outside. Skipping down a little bit to Conneaut, Ohio. Another postcard view. This one happens to be a large depot. Can't really see it in the postcard view, but the standard baggage in. Another postcard view. The street side, you can see it's just a standard large depot. Another late 60s, early 70s Chuck Bowie photo from the Society's archives. 2010 photo. Again, this was the other stop on the bus tour, as another railroad museum that's been the depot's been converted to the railroad museum. Street side view. And Conneaut being a large nickel plate steam shop and division point, nickel plate Burke is parked outside. A little further down the line, milepost 137, Geneva, Ohio. This one happens to be a large depot. Let me check my notes here. Yep, this one was built in 1900. What I forgot to mention is the baggage sides varied on the left and the right. This one happens to have the baggage side on the right, the waiting room, the large waiting room on the left here. Northeast, going back there a second, had the left side baggage, and Westfield had the baggage on the right-hand side. Another view of Geneva. Let me look at my notes here. Built in 1900. There's no known photographs that I found of a street side of this. Thing I forgot to mention earlier is with the gable, not the gables, the dormers. Most of the depots had dormers on the track side only. We'll look at a couple examples. Westfield had one on the street side, but most of them only had the dormers on the track side. So where are we at? We're at Geneva. I was not able to find a photo of the street side, so I can't tell you if this one had a dormer on the street side or not. Unfortunately, this depot was raised in about 1968, so we can't tell. Down on the Oil City branch in western central Pennsylvania, milepost 7.9, another large depot. This one happens to be built in 1901, and it had a trackside dormer only. There's no dormer on the street side, and the baggage end was on the right-hand side of the depot. Another view of the depot looking the other direction. 1968 Chuck Bowie photo. You can tell that the windows have all been boarded up and probably converted to a maintenance away office for the track inspector or track crews. 1999 photo. I think this happens to be about the last decent photo of the building, as a daycare has purchased the building, this 2015 photo, and has had an addition added to it. Looking at a Google satellite view, here is the actual depot, and a daycare addition over here, and a daycare addition over here, and this whole area here is fenced in for the kids to play in. So the depot has not looked like it did in the past. As moving to the other side of Toledo to Delta, Ohio, milepost 318 on the main line, we have another standard small depot. Delta, I don't know when that one was built. It's got the trackside dormer on only, and the baggage is on the right-hand side. And my notes say it has orange bricks, which we'll see here in a second. Another 1969 photo from Chuck Bowie. Just checked my news feed here. Paul asked about Ashtabula. We'll get to Ashtabula toward the end. 1985 Conrail view. Looks a little ragged, for its age. And then this I shot last year, and it turns out to be really ragged. If this depot doesn't survive another 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't be surprised. It sits at the end of a dead-end road, kind of surrounded by trees off in the middle of nowhere, where some of the other depots are right in town. This one's not showing the love of the neighborhood and the community. If we'll take a look, just walk around, the baggage end is on this end, the waiting room is on this end. View from the other direction, the baggage door. The end. Moving a few miles down, 20 miles down to Stryker, Ohio. This depot was built in 1900. Again, it's got the trackside dormer only, and the baggage is on the left-hand side. (1967) Chuck Bowie photo. Again, the windows are boarded up. Probably maintenance away, track inspector use. But this depot happens to sit on a busy in-town road, and it's been nicely restored by the Stryker Historical Society. Just a quick walk around the depot. Okay, moving up into Michigan. The original Toledo and Jackson Railroad ran from Toledo to Jackson, and the Southern Railroad of Michigan ran from Monroe, Michigan, till it ran out of money in the Hinsdale area. Where the two crossed is Lenawee Junction. When New York Central wanted to complete the line from Buffalo to Chicago, the original main line came up here to Lenawee Junction, and then west along the Southern Railroad of Michigan back to Hillsdale, and then towards Chicago and Elkhart. So this became known as the Old Road Branch when the mainline airline was built between Elkhart and Toledo in the late 1860s, early 1870s. So the old road came up to Lenawee Junction and then went west from there. Lenawee Junction Depot is a little bit odd. You see the main line here. This is toward Toledo, off to the right. Elkhart to the rear. This train over here is sitting on the old Southern Railroad of Michigan track to Monroe. Have an operator's bay, on this side. Paired window, operator's door, and we'll see it a little bit later, but no dormer on either side of the depot. We'll take a look here at another photo. This one looks east. Again, the track here heads off to Monroe, to Toledo, and this Y connection goes up to Jackson. Again, here's the track to Monroe, and this is the opposite side of the depot. It has an operator's bay on both sides of the depot, but it only has a single waiting room. We'll see here in the next slide, this Jim Finley photo from the Doug Leffler collection. This train here, we're kind of looking back west. Paired window, entry door, operator's bay, paired window, and the end here. So most depots have a double entry door on either side of the operator's bay, where this one does not. I have not been able to find a photo of this end, so I don't know if it was a baggage, more than likely a baggage door and a window, but which side of the baggage door was on, I couldn't tell you. Again, looking back east, track to Monroe, the main line to Toledo is back over here. Again, the windows are boarded up. I'm not really sure about this date, but probably in the Penn Central era, 1970s. This 1976 photo, the depot is in sad shape from Doug Leffler. And fortunately, that's the last photo I've been able to find of it. Here's the track layout from Google Earth toward Toledo. A wide track comes up. This heads up to Jackson. This is to Hinsdale and east eventually to, or west eventually to Elkhart and Chicago. Y connection here, and then the branch to Monroe stays on the south side of Deerfield Road, goes east here. A couple miles back, almost south central Michigan, we come to Sturgis, Michigan, milepost 400 on the old road. Again, that's from Buffalo. Early 1900s postcard view. Change my notepad here. This depot actually was built, one of the early ones, built in 1896. Again, a dormer on the track side only, and the baggage is on the left-hand side, is viewed from the track side. Another postcard view looking the other direction. In Sturgis, the Pennsylvania subsidiary, the Grand Rapids and Indiana crossed. So the tower controlling the crossing is we're looking back east toward the depot. Probably have I believe that's an H46, 280, or G46, 280 coming on the connection track here. 1970 Chuck Bowie photo. It looks at in a halfway decent condition. 1984 photo. And again, this is kind of in town, just a couple blocks north of downtown. So it kind of showed some love from the community. And in 2014, it got jacked up and moved to a nicer location on the main street in town. And its current location, when I first visited in 2014, I went to the location and saw a pile of foundation rubble, and I'm like, oh no, they tore it down. Well, turns out they moved it about 4 blocks away. And it's been nicely restored by the Sturgis Historical Society. We'll just do a quick walk around, the baggage end, the waiting room end. And the Historical Society put historic photos in the windows. So that's what you're seeing here, is historic photos from the county in the windows. And a Doug Leffler photo on the inside. It's the county historical society or the city historical society. Trying to tell the history of the town. So the railroad, and then pre probably statehood photos. So it's it's a true historical museum. About 15 miles down the road, on the old road, we come to White Pigeon, Michigan. This one is the earliest one, built in 1894. And when the conductor said that he had to run into the depot to do an errand, he did not mean to take the G46 with him. So we'll see here in a minute what some of the results that still last today from this derailment. I haven't been able to figure it out, but this G46 was scrapped in, where'd it go? I believe it was 1923. So this derailment happened before 1923. Yeah, 1923, G43. My mistake. Again, this 1970 photo, it kind of looks a little run down. The windows are boarded up, but 1984 looks like it had a new roof installed, so it's showing some love. But today, it's been completely restored by the city and used as a community center. Going back to the derailment here, we can see the yellow bricks on some side here, but then gray bricks on the rest of the depot. So the entire front end, all the way up to the paired window, has been rebuilt from the derailment damage. This one also, like Lenawee Junction, paired window, entry door, operator's bay, and then paired window. There is no waiting room on the one side of the depot. Again, this is would be the looking back east, yellow bricks, and then a repaired darker brick from the derailment. Quick walk around the street side. You see no entry door, but a single window instead of a paired window on the street side of this depot. Then you can see the different colored bricks from the yellow and the gray. Moving a little further down, this time we're just west of Elkhart at Mishawaka, Indiana. Milepost 432 on the main. A little bit different. Originally, if you go back to 412 to 432, it's not 20 miles difference. It's more like 40 miles. Originally both of them are from Buffalo. Both mileposts are from Buffalo. The airline between Elkhart and Toledo is a lot shorter by about 20 miles. So that's the difference in the mileposts. Mishawaka postcard view. It's a short depot, standard features. No dormer on the street side of the depot. Another postcard view. Again, the baggage room is on the left-hand side as viewed from the track. A Eugene Van Dusen photo from Morning Sun Books, 1953. Pair of brand new F7s pulling a freight, likely out of Elkhart, heading towards Chicago. 1963 photo. Unfortunately, right after this photo, in the 1970s, this depot was raised. Moving to Indiana Harbor, milepost 502 on the main line. Indiana Harbor was also the connection, the junction from the Chicago, Indiana, and Southern, sometimes known as the unofficially the Egyptian line, running from Indiana Harbor down to Danville. Early postcard view. It's a large depot with a dormer on the track side only. Seeing the street side, no dormer. The baggage room is on the left-hand side. This view looking back east, the depot is right here. Y connection to the Chicago, Indiana Southern. This track here heads off to plant 1 of the Inland Steel Company, 4-track main line. This happens to be the B&O over here. And the EJ&E, South Chicago branch, actually, you see these high tension towers, how odd they look. The EJ&E had a right-of-way, and they built the high tension towers right over the right-of-way. These happen to power the South Chicago plant of U.S. Steel, where the generating plant was in Gary, about 15 miles away. So 15 miles, they sent power from the power plant in Gary to the plant in South Chicago. So that the high tension lines were built right on the EJ&E right away. So that's the odd look of those towers. Another 1954 Eugene Van Dusen photo from Morning Sun Books. I put this photo in here to give the idea. The depot sat right here in the middle of the Y connection. The train 63, I believe it was, the Egyptian from Chicago down to Cairo, would have taken this Y. Y connection heading east toward Elkhart. The main line, the B&O, is now abandoned, which was right in here. The EJ&E up here, and then the massive Inland Steel Plant 2 on the north here. This depot actually had a reverse commuter operation. All the way up until through World War II, a lot of the employees of the steel mills and refineries of Northwest Indiana lived in Chicago, and they would take the New York Central to Indiana during the day, get off here, and go to Inland Steel and the other refineries and steel mills. Some of the trains up until the 1940s actually turned here at Indiana Harbor and went back to Chicago, and then another few of them continued another 10 miles to Gary, and then another 15 or 20 miles to my hometown of Chesterton, Indiana. The nickel plate, the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis, as we said before, was New York Central ownership until 1913, and they had one depot that was built to this style. And we see it here, this 1912 postcard. This depot was different because it had canopies on both sides of the depot. You can see the original nickel plate wood depot just the next block over. Another view looking back the other direction, canopy on the other end. This 1950 Harry Zimmer photo, another nickel plate Burke passing the depot. And this 1976 photo, the depot's in a little rough shape. I believe it burnt in 1980 and then was raised soon after that. The Lake Erie and Western ran from Sandusky to Peoria, and at Lafayette, it crossed the Big Four line from down here Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and then from trackage rights from Kankakee into Chicago. So if you're in Lafayette, to where I worked for 3 years, they didn't call it the Lake Erie and Western Depot. It's been known as the Big Four Depot because more central trains ran on or stopped at Lafayette. Going to this map over here, the Lake Erie and Western and the Big Four shared joint trackage from Altamont, which is on the southeast side of Lafayette, to Lafayette Junction, where they crossed the Monon and the Wabash, then over the Wabash River through West Lafayette and to Templeton, where the New York Central continued up to Kankakee and Chicago, where the nickel plate continued toward Peoria. This early view of the depot at Lafayette. It's a large depot with 2 paired windows on each end. Another postcard view. Now Lafayette differs a little bit. This 1971 view of the James Whipcomb Riley under Amtrak control, stopping in front of the depot. As I said, Lafayette differed a little bit. This is the street side. It had a dormer on the street side, but instead of the raised windows for the restrooms, it had a center entrance door with restroom windows on each side of the center entrance door. So here's the one paired window on this side, a window, single window, center entry door, and single window, and then another pair of paired windows on the other side here. In 1994, part of railroad relocation in Lafayette, removing 3 miles of street running on the Monon and almost 40 grade crossings on the Wabash. They were rerouted along the old I&M, the Indiana-Michigan Canal. So the depot was moved to its current location. We see the rerouted Monon tracks here and the rerouted Wabash tracks, with the depot sitting as kind of a transportation hub for the city. Both Greyhound city buses stop here, and then Amtrak stops along the old Monon. So on the street side, it's used as a community event space. A lot of community gatherings, bands, and on the weekends up until this past year. So let's do a little recap. Northeast of the short depots here, Northeast had a right side baggage. Delta, also a right side baggage with orange bricks. Stryker, a left-hand side baggage with orange bricks. Lenawee Junction, right side, no dormers on either side. I gotta move my little view here. Had operators bays on both sides, and it only had one entrance door per side. Sturgis, the standard left-hand side's baggage. White Pigeon, no entry doors to the left of the operator's baggage or the operator's bay. Had yellow bricks. Oh, with White Pigeon, I forgot to mention. All the depots had stone on the bottom, except for White Pigeon. It had brick and stone on the lower, and then the derailment damage, yellow and kind of yellow-gray bricks. And in that derailment damage, the in baggage door was built as a 4-foot door instead of a 5-foot door. And Mishawaka had the left-hand side baggage. The large depots, Westfield had the extended baggage room, a street-side dormer built with gray bricks. Conneaut, Franklin, and Geneva, all right-hand side baggages. Indiana Harbor Belt, left-hand side, or Indiana Harbor, left-hand side. Hammond, right-hand side with canopies on both ends. And then Lafayette, the right-hand side. On the street side of the depot, a single centered door with a street-side dormer. Ashtabula, one of the first variants that we're going to look at. This is the street side view with the streetcar in front. You can see here, there is no paired windows. They're all singled windows. And you can see on the roof here, the operator's bay is an extra large operator's bay that kind of sticks out. This is the street side, so there's no operator's bay, but we'll see here in a minute. The track side, single window, door, single window, door. And then this window here is at 90 degrees to the wall, and then parallel to the tracks, window, operator's bay, and then repeated as a mirror on the other side of the depot. This 1919 validation photo kind of shows all the details. And then on the ends, instead of a bank of 3 windows, single window, single window, single window with bricks between the windows. They had a separate baggage house that was built with the same style of same construction, same roof supports, baggage door, window, baggage door, window. Another street side photo. Trackside postcard photo from 1908. Another 1969 Chuck Bowie photo showing both the depot and the baggage house. Looking back the other way. And then on the baggage end of the depot, I guess the 1919 photo said had a Railway Express sign here. So this end probably would be for passengers' baggage, but it's still the same window, door, window configuration. 2010 photo, look in the street side. And the other side, 2010 of the track side. It was railroad use, windows are boarded up, new replacement doors. And unfortunately, in 2018, CSX decided it was no longer needed and met the excavator. Down in Tipton, Indiana, again on the Lake Erie and Western, running from Sandusky to Peoria, and then a branch from Indianapolis up to Michigan City, where I'm at. The two crossed here at Tipton. Looking at this depot on the end, the passenger waiting room end, bank of 3 windows with no bricks between them, but we have a single window, single window, single window, entry door, operator's bay, entry door, and then 3 single windows. Another street side or track side looking east here, have the standard large depot end, the baggage in with door or window, door, window. This view actually kind of looks the opposite direction. The street side view, here is the Michigan City branch here, and then the Sandusky to Peoria main here. On the street side, it actually is one of the depots that has a street side dormer. Again, on the track side, 1940 photo looking, this would be looking east. Same view, 2009 photo. You see the windows are boarded up with a door replacing the old baggage door. And I shot this photo back in, I believe it was June or July. The still under railroad use, Norfolk Southern. And then the street side view. All right, moving to Elkhart, Indiana, division point for the Western Division. First glance, it doesn't look anything like a standard depot. Well, if we look at some of the details here in a second, it had an attached baggage house. This is probably a late 1940s photo. And then probably a mid-60s photo. The baggage house has been removed and the canopy still connecting the two has been shortened here. But if we look at it, here's the street side view. While the dormer is not quite the same, it's got the same features, but then the windows are the same. And we'll take a quick walk around the depot. So the National New York Central Railroad Museum, no affiliation with the society, is across the main line. So the trackside looking east. And again, the standard windows and doors and the operator's bay. This one happens to be a little bit wider than your standard operator's bay, but still the same details added, or the same architectural details that appeared on the standard depots appear on this depot. Again, we got Mohawk 3001 kind of peeking in the corner here. And our last depot that we're going to look at is at Bloomington, Illinois, kind of on the west end of the Lake Erie and Western. And this was a joint depot with the Peoria and Eastern as well. Again, it doesn't look like a standard depot, except for the dormers, and this one had two dormers on the track side. The roof brackets are different, the windows and doors are different, but I included this one because it has the same identical dormers. The Peoria and Eastern track on the right, the nickel plate track on the left. And we can see here that no stone or brick, it's just an entire brick depot, so no stone around the windows, in the corners, or below the windows. But it does have the same roof dormers as all the other depots. Again, depot was boarded up and it has since been raised. It's at right in this area here. All right, getting on to the modeling portion. The Society commissioned with the N-scale architect a model of a brick and stone lines west depot. This is besides being produced by the N-scale architect, it was produced in both an HO and N-scale, and it's available through the Society today. The street side view, the model happened to be modeled after Lafayette. That's just the plans that we ended up with. So the model does have a street side dormer and a single entry door with the windows. So it's really based at Lafayette, but if you put the track side against the street side against the back of your layout and have the front side, the track side view, you wouldn't know the difference. When you open up the box, it looks like a bunch of plywood. Laser cut, goes together quite nicely, except what I did with the kit that I had. In the two recent issues of the New York Central Modeler, I showed how to kit bash it. We took the large depot and, like the Price is Right game squeeze play, we pulled a couple sections out and squeezed the depot together. So the ends got removed. So the end detail here became the detail on the end of the window here. On the street side, this this window was converted to an entry door. Then I reworked the entire restroom side here, again on the other side. And then on the street side, it just got compressed. And on the ends here, we removed a section of the wall, squeezed it together again up here, converted it from a triple window to 2 single windows. And as the restroom area here, this happens to be northeast, built a bump out for the restroom. Here's like the inner walls. Here's the restroom bump out, just made with a basswood sheet, and then cut a new piece of N-scale architect brick material. So these are the four walls when I was completed the kit bashing. So a rebuilt restroom area. This happens to be the street side. The end wall on the baggage end, the end wall on the waiting room end, and then the wall for the track side. So when it was all put together, I didn't know how to do the roof. So the roof was built from basswood sheets, completely rebuilt, and then used the roofing material that came with the N-scale architect kit. So all this was detailed in this past issue and the second past issue of New York Central Modeler on how I did it. So I took the kit to our last in-person meeting in September of last year and shot it in front of the depot at Delta, Ohio. So we have the depot of Delta, Ohio in the background, and then the model that it represents in front. But before I did it, I took some photos on a little diorama that I built. And with the kit was actually donated by a director from the society. I cut it up and modified it to a shorter version and then donated it back to the society. So when it comes time to have our next in-person meeting, I believe the kit will be available for purchase or auction at the next in-person society meeting. So that wraps it up. I'll take any questions now.
Seth, we have one question out there, which is from Paul, and he wants to know any idea what drove the decisions to have different designs at some locations. For example, Painesville and Madison.
Say that again.
For example, Painesville and Madison, Ohio.
Okay, I'm not too familiar with Madison, but Painesville, I can't tell. I don't know. When I was looking at the depots, the earlier ones like at Stryker, the other brick and stone, they were built at the same time. So I can't tell you from one position to the other. Yeah, Painesville's a little bit different architectural details. That's why I didn't include it in this presentation. But it was a couple different plans that okay, we'll take this one or that one. I couldn't answer. Between a large depot and a small version, that pretty much dealt with either city size or projected city size. If the town was going to be small, then hopefully we'll get a smaller depot, or if the town was expected to grow, we might get a larger depot. But again, these weren't original depots. The lines were built in the 1840s, 1850s, and these depots were built 30 years later. So these are replacement depots, either from a depot burning down or just the original depot on the line wasn't adequate. Okay. Anything else, Bob?
We have John, who would like to know where you got your 20th century observation car in the photo.
That century observation car is a Eastern Car Works, who had it before? Eastern Car Works kit that actually I picked up at a hobby shop a couple years ago and just used it on I don't know who built it, but it's an Eastern Car Works. The name's eluding me now, who had the Eastern Car Works line before, but that's where that car came from. It's Island Series Observation. Right, EMB Valley. Thank you, Alex. The car was, I believe it was pre-decorated, but the Pullman name and the island name are decals on it. But I bought it that way. That's what I can tell you about it.
Okay.
Alex has roof question. Where did that?
Okay.
It just says roof question.
Did the breaking the roof lines line up with the bottom of the dormer? Oh, I remember going through this myself.
They did not. The bottom of the dormer was actually set below the break in the roof. The model actually represents that. It sits a little bit lower. I believe the front of the dormer lines up with the front edge of the wall. So the break in the roof, or the bend in the roof, sits a little bit higher than the front of the wall.
Okay, let's see. Here's another question on cabooses. Were any of the 20,100 series rebuilt from boxcars? If that's the lot 732, which I believe it is, yes, they were.
Yes, all of them 36 foot,
Right.
36 foot boxcars.
Yep. Okay. I don't see anything else for the moment. Before we go, I have to extend my thanks to all those folks you didn't see or hear today. Manuel Duran in Puerto Rico was instrumental in getting this Zoom conference connected to YouTube so you could all watch it. Noel Witterfield's recorded the entire thing, so one of these days we can make it available to others on our YouTube pages or through our website. Frank Bongiovanni rode shotgun over all of us to try to keep us in line, make suggestions on how to improve it and record it and track our mistakes so we try not to do those again. Bob McQueen has been backing up Manuel and doing this rotating slideshow, keeping us all moderated and filling in as a narrator when I wasn't. And not to diminish Alex Schneider, Seth Lakin, or Jeff English's contributions as well. Without the presenters, we wouldn't have anything to give you. I thank you so very much for all your participating and attendance in all of this. I look forward to seeing comments on our Facebook page. Well, we can't do that yet. On our blog, or emails to those of us who want to reach out. And our IO group is always there for members to comment on. Other than that, unless there's anything else, we'll let you know what we're going to do and when we're going to do it as events unfold. It's a little early yet to figure out 2021 because conditions are changing rapidly, unfortunately, and we don't know what we're going to be able to do. I thank you for attending. I appreciate your time. I think it was very well spent by everybody, not only watching, but participating and giving the presentation. And with that, we will close with a little New York Central Historical Society video and music, if Manuel ready to pull the plug on it.